George Russell's having his best ever Formula One season. He's now a race winner, he's been on the podium in half of the races, and he's fourth in the championship. So why, John Noble, doesn't he have a contract for next year? It's a simple question. Does it have a simple answer?
No, it is an intriguing one because there's a world of thought that if you've got a driver that you've been raving about, Toto Wolff said as early as the Chinese Grand Prix, Max is top 3, top 2, potentially even the top number 1 driver in the world this season. So it would seem logical if you've got a driver who's out of contract at the end of the year to get him to sign it. But it's not happened. So the question, which perhaps there is no firm answer to, is it not being signed because there's no need to rush to get it done? Or is there something else going on in the background?
Well, on that subject, I very nearly corrected you when you said it. You misspoke and said Max rather than George when you said what Toto said back in China. And the reason I let it go is because I think that strikes at the heart of the matter. Sometimes when Wolff is talking, the unspoken part, which you have spoken there, is how much is Max Verstappen on the brain? Because the last time we were here and talking about Russell's future, it was very much in the context of Mercedes waiting on Verstappen, holding out for him. So how much do you think that is a factor here? Or have we moved past that and it's purely in a phase of Mercedes and Russell just needing to find time to get down and do the negotiations, or trying to time it to match Russell's home race at Silverstone or something like that?
Yeah, I think early on in the season, the Max factor was still quite important. There's a lot of uncertainty about Red Bull's position. How competitive was it going to be? What were Max's thoughts going forwards? Was he looking at stepping out for 26? Was he going to continue? But I sense as time's gone by, the Max elements kind of fall into the background. Red Bull's not had, too disastrous a season. Max has won some races, needs a bit more of a push to be fighting for the championship, but it's not a million miles away. And I think Max's head also, he talks about, this team's done a lot and things clicking. So I think that's fallen away now. So the real issue now is ultimately down to timing and what happens. And I think also from Mercedes' perspective, this is classic negotiating tactics. You don't want to force a deal too quickly because you kind of weaken your negotiating hand. Always good to keep them hungry. Always good also to see how your current guys are doing, because we saw, I know it's a different kind of situation, but Red Bull gave Sergio Perez a new contract after Monaco last year, convinced that this would settle him, make him feel a bit more confident, lift his performance, and had the opposite effect. So I think you've always got to keep your drivers hungry in F1 as well.
Well, let's let Russell have the last word on Verstappen and the talks with Mercedes, because he said after winning in Canada, there haven't been any hard feelings with any of the talks that have been going around, especially around Max. If every driver had no contract for next year, Max would be number 1 for every single team, and that's understandable. So no hard feelings as far as Russell's concerned, and he reiterates he's not worried about his place next year. He has joked that he might have to do a Valtteri Bottas-style naked calendar to raise funds if he gets into trouble. We'll pick up Russell and the Mercedes situation and the contract talks in a second, but it is worth just very quickly talking about the situation that Mercedes is in right now with the quality of driver Russell has, because when Verstappen comes into the frame, it's always about like he's one of the few drivers who is an upgrade on Russell, right? But the Canada result with Russell winning and Kimi Antonelli, the young rookie, backing him up on the podium in third was quite a nice glimpse of how mega Mercedes' own driver future could be. So why has Russell been so good this year? And has he actually been a little bit better than even Mercedes thought he would be?
Yeah, I think there's always that uncertainty, because F1's a relative game. We saw George last year, was quicker than Lewis Hamilton in qualifying, very, very strong season. But you never know, was this the same quality of Lewis Hamilton who was winning multiple world championships, or had Lewis, potentially stepped down a little bit more, struggling a little bit with these cars? So I think what this season has given Mercedes is a proper gauge of how good Russell is, because, he's been brilliant this season. Early season form, one of the most consistent podium finishes. The win in Canada, absolute top draw, mega qualifying lap to extract everything. Flawless in the race. Everything you could want and need from a driver. But I don't think the results and the form are going to fast track this contract, because I still think Mercedes in a situation where it doesn't need to do anything. George may, prefer to get this contract done tomorrow, but from Mercedes' perspective, they manage him, so no one else can do a deal without them saying yes. Time-wise, there's no need to rush to get it done because George isn't really going to go anywhere else. And thirdly, this is very classic Mercedes. If we look at previous times they signed their contracts, very, very rarely are things done any earlier than now.
Yeah, it's interesting actually picking up on what you said there about the lack of options basically for both parties for Mercedes in terms of wanting someone other than Russell. It's really Verstappen or nobody, and that seems to only be going one way and has only been going one way for a while. And Russell's in a weird place because the form that he's in and the contractual situation that he has, he should actually be in a mega negotiating position because he could be looking at this and just saying, well, look, I'm in the form of my life. I am leading your team. Without me, Antonelli's got great potential, but is very rough around the edges still, even with that Canada podium. But he doesn't have appealing alternatives. So Mercedes can just call his bluff and say, well, yeah, if you want to take your time and go and talk around other people, well, like, be our guest. But where are you going to go? Aston Martin, Alpine? Are you going to hold out for a shift somewhere else? Now, Russell says he's not talking to others and has made it very clear when he has had some conversations, which he's hinted at, that have taken place with potential parties, that his priority is Mercedes. But does Mercedes hold all the cards here? And does that fit into what you were saying just then about the fact that they traditionally do their driver deals late? So why are they going to rush?
Yeah, I think from Mercedes' perspective, Russell doesn't have a better option that's available tomorrow. From Red Bull's perspective, its preference is Max Verstappen. The likelihood Max Verstappen is staying. And I think it's pretty untenable to put Max and George into the same team, the way that rivalry is bubbling away at the moment. And Red Bull don't like a situation of having to manage two kind of A-plus drivers. They very much believe the best way to win championships is A-star driver and someone to not necessarily be a number two, but a good solid backup that helps win the Constructors' Championship. And I don't think George fits into that ideal scenario for them. So that's not really an option, even though we understand there were some chats, informal chats, not about contracts, but just about what is your availability. Christian Horner, bumped into George a couple of occasions. They've had talks about what the situation is, but it hasn't gone as far as do you want a deal? And beyond that, Aston Martin, there's been rumours about that, but they've got Fernando Alonso under contract for next year. They've got Lance Stroll under contract for next year. So someone from Aston Martin told me, unfortunately, Aston Martin can't run a third car next year. So unless George is interested in being a simulator driver or development driver, there's not really an option there for him for next year. But 27 is a very different prospect, but that's a bit more complicated to get over the line, knowing what Mercedes want to do. Alpine do have a seat available, but if you're George Russell, would you swap Mercedes for Alpine? I don't think it's there. So from Mercedes' perspective, I think it does hold all the cards. It can sit back, it can drive forward what it wants, and it can get things done in its own timeline, which fits around, July time, summer break, and even potentially afterwards.
And you mentioned earlier, and this is something that I think Toto Wolff has been quite keen to stress, that the results in the first part of the year haven't suddenly made Mercedes realise Russell's a really good driver. I think what this year may have done is just quell any of the doubts about just how good a driver he can be. I think he's been at the very upper end of what we've seen of Russell in the last few years in Formula One, and now he's piecing it together pretty much every single weekend. But the only other question I have on that topic really is whether or not, if Russell had been at this level consistently last year, he could have got all of this done sooner, because the one part of it that does still seem a little bit strange, and I guess this comes back to the Verstappen of it all, is that we've known since the start of 2024 about Lewis Hamilton's bombshell move to Ferrari and Mercedes needing to work out what its future would be. It settled on Kimi Antonelli very early in that process and announced him in the late summer of last year. But at this time, it knew what Russell's contractual situation was. So could Russell have pushed harder for a new deal sooner, given he knew that he would be the leader in the team? Why do you think that hasn't come to pass, or are we just getting back to the max factor?
I think the max factor is there, but I think from Mercedes' perspective, when we talked about them holding all the cards, it also is critical because they manage him. So nobody else can. It's not like we've had in the past where teams have swoops like McLaren got Juan Pablo Montoya, where someone can come around the back door and do a secret deal with George from underneath, pull the rug from underneath them, and they've lost him. They're fully
no one's going to do a Ferrari, Vettel, Red Bull, are they?
No, exactly. So there's not a scenario where there's a danger of George being grabbed by someone else and disappearing. So they can dictate the timeline. They dictate how things are going. And Toto well knows that, let's see how things develop. Let's get things done properly and take our time, which they've done in the past. When you look at the previous contract extensions, even for Lewis, the last contract was announced on August the 31st. That would be after summer break. And there was one time, if we don't forget, after 2020, his 21 contract was not announced until February the 8th. So, a month or so before the season started. Now, I don't anticipate things going on that long for George. I still think it will be done the next 6 to 8 weeks. But there is history of Mercedes dragging things out and making sure things are done robustly, not in a rush, just for the sake of getting a contract done.
Yeah, it's intriguing at the moment for Russell being out of contract, but it is only June 2025. If he is still out of contract by February 2026, then we've probably got a bigger story on our hands.